At this point, I'd like to turn things over to our founder and board chair, Jody D'Agostini, so we can get the evening started. Jody?
Thank you, Susan, and thank you to everybody who got this together and has helped supported this event, got us to this place. The great turnout this evening underscores that there are many concerns and questions in the community about the potential impact of the recent legislation of recreational marijuana. When new substance use trends emerge that generate these types of concerns, Community in Crisis has tried to lead the way by providing information and promoting prevention initiatives. We did this in 2014 in response to the opioid epidemic, and again in 2018 in response to the vaping epidemic. Our goal is to arm parents and stakeholders with information to deal with emergent threats that have the potential to harm the community and especially our youth. Although the legislation signed into law in February prohibits use by anyone under age 21, it has also included many provisions that reduce some of the consequences for youth for possession of marijuana and other substances, including alcohol. This means it's more important than ever for parents, educators, and youth leaders to fully understand the risks associated with marijuana use by youth and the potential unintended consequences in the community based on what has happened in other states where marijuana has been legalized. This is the focus of the presentation this evening, and we're very fortunate to have Luke Niforatos from Smart Approaches to Marijuana here to address those issues. But before we turn it over to Luke, I want to ask Mike Robertson to provide some additional context. Mike is our Somerset County prosecutor with deep connections to our area. He's a graduate of Ridge High and currently resides in Basking Ridge with his wife and 2 young children. Mike, could you please help us set the stage by giving a brief summary of where things currently stand from a law enforcement perspective?
Yes, absolutely. And thanks for having me. And I appreciate everything that your organization does for our community. So the new legislation that took effect basically changed the rules, changed the law. And specifically, I want to talk about the juvenile effect, which is the following. If a juvenile is in possession of alcohol or marijuana, the police can no longer basically take that person into custody. They are to issue a warning, which initially the law, the way it was written, that warning was not going to be provided to the parents. It's since been changed. About 3 weeks ago, they changed it. So the parents, if there is an encounter with police, the parents, along with the child, will get a warning. In fact, there will be up to 3 warnings that a child or a juvenile would receive for being in possession of alcohol or marijuana. That also, by the way, includes hallucinogenic drugs like mushrooms, PCP, and some other dangerous drugs, in my opinion. And so my message, I'm a father before I'm a prosecutor. I have 2 children. One's at William Mannon. The other one is on the cusp of entering William Mannon. And the thing that I often say, and I give my father credit for it, which he probably would laugh about if he heard me, because I would butt heads with him when I was a young kid, which is this, and it's the advice I give to everyone. He would say to me, Michael, I'm your father, I'm not your friend. And I think that resonates more now than ever, because while many parents' inclination is to, make our children happy, I'm guilty of doing it myself. But at the end of the day, when it comes to drugs and alcohol, we need to step up and be parents and not worry about being our kids' friends. They have plenty of friends. They don't need us to be our friends. And so, the police, law enforcement, we're obviously, heavily involved in the community and want to help our fellow citizens and continue to do what we can do. But if I'm being perfectly candid, in light of this legislation, we now more than ever need parents to be really, really, really aware of what their kids are doing. I can't emphasize that enough. Again, I would never tell anyone how to be a parent. It's super difficult. It's very challenging, especially now with COVID and technology, and it's just a different environment. But I would really encourage everyone to listen to what Luke has to say. And if there's any questions, concern, I'm always available. I'll make myself available. field any questions that you may have. But I thank Luke for coming tonight and sharing with us his expertise in this arena. So with that, I'll turn it back over. Thank you.
And thanks, Mike. You've been such a great supporter of CIC since the start. I don't know where we'd be without your expertise and leadership and mentorship for us. So thank you also. And here you are stepping up again from the lacrosse field. Thank you. Luke is Executive Vice President of Smart Approaches to Marijuana, which is the leading national advocacy group promoting common sense marijuana policies and educating the public on the science of marijuana in order to reduce irresponsible availability and use. Luke's background is in nonprofit community healthcare, having helped manage federally qualified health centers and working on health disparities. Prior to joining SAM, Luke was also the co-founder of Doc Buddy, a healthcare startup based in Denver, Colorado. He has led SAM's victories in more than 24 states and has been featured at The Economist Cannabis Summit, as well as the United Nations Commission on Narcotic Drugs, and in dozens of events and town halls across the country on the subject of drug policy. He's also been featured in many national media outlets, including Fox News and CNBC, and his op-eds are regularly published across the country. Luke graduated from the University of Denver, and his home state of Colorado gives him a unique vantage point on the issue of sound drug policy. Welcome, Luke. We're very happy to have you.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much, Mike. I want to thank you so much for your service to the community, the great work that you and the members of law enforcement do. It's just such a blessing to see you involved in a group like this. I want to thank CIC for the great work that they do. And Jerry and Susan and Jody, thank you for the tremendous service that you provide to your communities there in New Jersey. As they mentioned, I'm Luke. It's so nice to see everybody here virtually. If this was in a non-COVID environment, I have a feeling I would be there in person and, shaking your hand, but we get to enjoy this virtual fun for a little while longer. And so it's not lost on me that you could be spending this hour and a half, doing other things with your family. So I want to thank you and for the honor of your time this evening. So I'm going to go ahead and pull up my slides. And while I do that, I wanted to say, being from Colorado, that's going to be my lived experience that I bring to this presentation is, everything I'm going to talk to you about, Though lived it, I've seen it. You're getting to the stage where you're going to be living and seeing it. But I do want to say just, don't lose heart. Even though your state made kind of, in my opinion, a very irresponsible policy decision, which, by the way, my organization fought for over 3 years, worked very, very hard in the legislature and, in communities across the state. I think I've literally spent more time in New Jersey than pretty much any other state in the country. So I've really enjoyed seeing your beautiful state. But what I will say is this: don't be discouraged. There's some very irresponsible parts of this legislation. Don't be discouraged. To Mike's point, we need strong parents. We also need you to be strong advocates. And so my hope is that this presentation will empower you with information, will educate you, and hopefully you'll want to do something about the facts and information that you see. And we'll talk a little bit about, some things that we could all work on at the end of the presentation. So I just want to make sure you know that you're going to learn a lot, and at the end we'll have some ideas on some things that we could work on together. So before I get into that, SAM, we're a C3 nonprofit, nonpartisan organization, really focused on two main goals. One is we want to educate decision makers and the public on the science of today's marijuana. And we also, the second goal is to promote public health-based policies for marijuana. And I use the word public health very, very carefully and with emphasis, because right now we're seeing a lot of states make profit-based policies when it comes to marijuana, how to enhance the profits of an industry. But we're not seeing public health and health first policies really make, as the primary core value. So for our organization, we want health first policies that reduce marijuana use and its related harms, because we see that as a scientific harm across the public, whether it's in America or any other country. We're nonpartisan, I mentioned, led by former Congressman Patrick J. Kennedy, as well as my boss, former Obama advisor, Dr. Kevin Sabet. And we are really led by our award-winning science advisory board. These are people from Harvard, Princeton, Yale, who are the leading researchers on marijuana in the world, doing research on the drug right now, even as we speak. And so they review this presentation, they review all the stats and other things that we put out as an organization, because we want cutting edge science to lead the day, not hyperbole, not kind of the reefer madness of yesteryears. Everything we say, we want it to be very much in cutting edge science. So because of that stand and that commitment to sound, scientific reason, we've worked with basically every major medical association. I just stood with the American Medical Association a few months ago, virtually stood with them at a press conference. So, we work with the AMA, we've collaborated with, the American Academy of Pediatrics, a number of other major medical associations and groups, and we have affiliates in basically every state. So we've done a lot of work, obviously, as I mentioned, in New Jersey. So we have SAM, our nonprofit, and then SAM Action, which is our sister organization, which does a lot of the lobbying and advocacy work, fighting for policies, and fighting against bad policies, for example. Before we kind of jump into a lot of the stats that I've got for you today, I want to make sure I spell this issue out with the next two slides here. So, a lot of times there's discussion of, we either totally commercialize and legalize marijuana or we throw everyone in prison. And so this is a false dichotomy. In reality, this is a 3-bucket issue, in my opinion, in our opinion. The first bucket is the issue of criminalization. And you heard a little discussion of some of the nuance of that that Mike was discussing. But, do we, criminalize users? And so obviously New Jersey's made the decision to, not only decriminalize users, but also legalize the commercial sales of the drug as well. But that's one debate is, should somebody who's got a joint in their pocket get a criminal record? And I think most of us probably don't think that that would be a good idea. But that's one debate. That's the one bucket, criminalization. Then we have the second bucket, which is medicinal use of the compounds. Now, obviously, New Jersey has medical marijuana, as does my state, Colorado. But what's interesting is a lot of people think that medical marijuana is reviewed by science, that it's a scientifically validated drug. In reality, there's been no clinical trials of the quote unquote medical marijuana you get in your state, no scientific review, no regulatory procedures whatsoever, no FDA review, et cetera. A lot of people don't know that. So the plant, another thing, interestingly, the marijuana plant has over 500 components to it. THC, that's what gets you high. Then you have CBD, which does not get you high, and I'm sure many of us have heard of that. The FDA has actually approved CBD in the form of Epidiolex to treat certain medical conditions, and you can get a prescription for that from your doctor. So that's medication that's been reviewed by science. You also have the FDA has actually approved other compounds as well. Marinol, pure THC, you can get a prescription for as well for your doctor. So we support the scientific method. We've never voted on our medicines before in this country. So it's just, that's something that our organization supports, but certainly other states have taken a different stand on that. But that's kind of the medical bucket. Then you have the recreational bucket, and that's, obviously looking at recreational use of the drug. Which we think comes with a host of concerns as well. So the reason why I separate these things out is just so we understand there is a lot of rhetoric out there about, well, we were throwing people in prison, so that's why we needed to commercialize marijuana. It's like, well, now we see those are two different issues. And so it's just important we don't allow these different issues to be conflated, and we can address each one of them on their own merits. So I just wanted to spell that out. Now, this is an interesting quote from The Economist. Basically what they're saying is, you have to pay for lab experiments, and you have to pay for people to test drugs or other things on in all research experiments. But in America, us and Canada, we're the only two countries that have allowed some form of legalization in the entire world, which many of us may not know, but we're literally the only two countries in the entire world that have allowed legalization of marijuana. We are basically conducting a free and open experiment on our youth and on the public. We've never seen what marijuana use looks like at a population level. And so The Economist makes a great point. North Americans come free. Usually it's lab animals or other things, those are expensive, but North Americans come free. And so we're gonna learn a lot from these experiments we're seeing in different states. Quick note, COVID-19, there is a link with marijuana use. The CDC, the WHO have all recommended against the use of marijuana during this pandemic because it can actually exacerbate COVID-19 symptoms and help you develop a severe case of it, which is very concerning. About a year or so ago, our former US Surgeon General now, Dr. Jerome Adams, top doctor in the country, issued a historic advisory on marijuana's potency and harm. Basically, this was the first time the Surgeon General's office has issued an advisory on the drug in over 40 years. Two concerns: potency, it's like it's never been before, and youth and pregnant women are using marijuana at unprecedented levels across the country. So it's a big enough concern that our nation's top doctor issued a historic advisory on it. Now, why would that be a concern? Well, what we're seeing is a huge big tobacco takeover. The fourth largest tobacco company on the planet in the UK has got a huge deal with the marijuana industry. Bring It Home, biggest tobacco company in America, Altria, which is the new name for Philip Morris and Marlboro, for those of you who don't know that, is now in over $2 billion into the marijuana industry. And just last month, or 2 months ago now, we learned that Altria successfully lobbied to legalize marijuana in Virginia. And this is the first state where they've officially kind of been out in the open lobbying to legalize marijuana. So they are all in on this. They see this as their new revenue model. And it's so frightening that even a number of pro-marijuana legalization advocates have now come out and said, we need to halt all federal legalization until we figure out a way to get tobacco out of it, because they realize that the takeover has basically been achieved, and it hasn't even been legalized federally yet. So we're in the midst of a disastrous scenario right now where they're not even the only two tobacco companies involved. For those of you who watch Mad Men, Lucky Strikes, they're into the marijuana industry now. You've got all these other tobacco companies we see here. Hopefully everybody remembers Juul, who was hauled before Congress not that long ago. We're actually, interesting enough, Juul's a spinoff from PAX, which is an explicitly marijuana vaporizer company. And as we all remember, Juul is the nicotine vaporizer company. So they actually started as a marijuana vaping company. Very interesting. And now they're following that playbook of big tobacco to the T. They're getting exemptions from the Clean Indoor Air Act in multiple states that have legalized marijuana, such as mine and the state of Illinois. Can't remember if New Jersey gave an exemption or not, but I think they did get an exemption there. But basically what this means is in my state, you can smoke a joint in a hotel, restaurant, or lounge, but you can't smoke a cigarette in a hotel, restaurant, or lounge. Which is just a real just logic defying state we're in as far as public health regulations go. And so for all the anti-tobacco folks out there, you could probably see how we're basically walking the clock back about 50 years in terms of public health regulations. And if you're not worried about tobacco, you may be worried about the guy who wrote the playbook for OxyContin, the former CEO of Purdue Pharma. He's now in the marijuana industry. Then you have alcohol brands, Constellation Brands, the biggest alcohol conglomerate in the world, Constellation. They put in now actually over $1 billion in the marijuana industry. And you've got marijuana hedge funds, which are, basically, this is not a stock photo, by the way. This is the guys that are running the first ever marijuana hedge fund called Privateer Holdings. These are guys with Yale and Harvard MBAs, not the hippies of yesteryears that, I wasn't around for, but I heard that was what marijuana was about, a few decades ago. But we're not talking about those hippies anymore. No banjos or anything like that. These guys are the face of marijuana now. And these are the people who are winning, by the way. And we're going to get into social justice in a little bit, but has nothing to do with minority communities at all. No social justice to this movement so far at all. And so what are these guys doing? They brought in their profit play. They're driving a lot of money on Wall Street. They want a return on their investment for the hundreds of millions of dollars that they're pouring into this industry right now. So we're going from this, which I think is what probably many of us think of, to this. And these are not, by the way, so I think we can all agree this isn't just 21 and up who this is appealing to, but these products are supposedly legal. The ones on the top left are actually sold by a dispensary called LiveWell, which is across the country, but in Colorado particularly is where it's based. And I have two daughters, by the way, a 4-year-old and a 3-month-old. So we're in the thick of it, having fun with our 3-month-old right now. If I look a little tired, that's why. She wasn't wanting to sleep last night. But nonetheless, we're having fun. And my 4-year-old, however, looked at this slide and she said, "Oh, those gummies, those look delicious." And that affirmed in my mind how important it is that we hold this industry accountable. So this is kind of what we're seeing happen. They're now skyrocketing the potency of this drug. So brand new formulations of marijuana we've never seen before commercialization, before Colorado legalized and commercialized marijuana. And we're seeing in all different kinds of formulations, a blowtorch, relax. I don't know if that makes me feel relaxed. Gummy bears, you'd think that these would be illegal even for people who are, pro things marijuana. I think we could all agree that gummy bears laced with THC are a bad idea for public health, for kids, appealing to kids. And yet in Washington state, the industry lobbied and was successfully able to yank in the last second a rule banning marijuana gummy bears. So why would the industry invest money in stripping these kinds of regulations if they truly want to be regulated as they've promised they want to? It's something we need to think about. And we're seeing the potency skyrocket now. You can see some of these graphs here, but basically plant potency is almost double what it was in the past, which means they're genetically modifying the marijuana plant to make it much more potent than it ever was. The concentrates, you can see that potency just skyrocket. So basically, the average potency of marijuana was 3% just a few decades ago. Now we're seeing products up to 99% potency. So the average marijuana, a researcher gave this great example. The average marijuana user, he compared THC, marijuana, to caffeine. Okay, so the average marijuana user in the 1990s was consuming the equivalent of one 20-ounce cola's worth of caffeine. Okay, so substitute caffeine for THC. Okay, so one cola's worth of caffeine on average daily. Now, that average user is consuming today 33 medium cappuccinos worth of caffeine or THC. So we're seeing an astronomical rise, and not just the potency, but the amount of THC that the average user is taking in. And so that's obviously got concerns, particularly when you see, and I have a business background, so I look at this from somewhat of a business perspective, and I look at the market right now. These 97% THC levels make up more than 15% of the market right now, and the 10 to 15% potency, less than 2%. So what that tells me from a business perspective is all the money is in the high potency stuff. The industry is going to keep pushing the potency because it's more addictive. They're making a lot more money on it. And that should be very troubling to us because these are the kinds of formulations. Again, I mentioned it's not hippies anymore. It's not this marijuana is often talked about as if it's like this organic, like urban co-op farming opportunity, or, it's all like from the soil. And this is anything but a natural plant anymore. These formulations are being made in labs by chemists. These are not being farmed and responsibly sourced and whatever else you want to say about that. It has nothing to do with it anymore. This is what the industry has turned this drug into. And so what's the result? Well, 1 in 3 people who used marijuana in the last year are developing a cannabis use disorder. That is the ICD-10 code, the medical diagnosis code for marijuana addiction. So if you've heard the myth out there that marijuana is not addictive, science news flash, marijuana absolutely is addictive. And if you have marijuana addiction, you're going to be diagnosed with it by our clinician at your office or in the hospital. So just a reminder that it is absolutely addictive. And these addiction rates, as you can tell, have just skyrocketed. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that. But what we've been promised is, and this is interesting, I think, for New Jersey to look at. Hopefully they will do a deep dive as the years go on with legalization in your state on what happens with the opioid crisis, because the promise is made that legalizing marijuana is going to solve the opioid crisis. I can't tell you how many times we've heard that. But interestingly, a lot of new research actually is telling us the opposite. This is a massive study done by the University of Queensland, that's in Australia. And let me just tell you how rock solid this study is. Okay, so they followed 1,500 people over 20 years of their life. So from the age of 15 to the age of 35. 1,500 people. So this is a massive study, very long-term study with a lot of research that went into it. And what they found was marijuana users who began as adults. A lot of times we hear, oh, it's just the youth, we need to protect the youth. Adults, 36.8 times more likely to use other drugs. 3 times more likely to be binge drinkers, 7 times more likely to smoke cigarettes daily. So very interestingly, we're seeing not this kind of replacement. Oftentimes we hear, oh, it's better that people are using marijuana instead of alcohol or marijuana instead of opioids. But this research actually has completely flipped that idea on its head. Another massive research study done in 2017, again, published in the American Journal of Psychiatry, regular marijuana users were 2.7 times more likely to abuse non-medical opioids. So again, seeing that association there. Now, this is a good point to say, I'm not telling you it's a gateway drug. Okay, you're not going to smoke a joint or eat an edible and then start injecting heroin right away. That's very unlikely to happen. However, this notion that people just use one drug, that they like marijuana, so they're only going to use marijuana, is completely false. People who use marijuana, oftentimes later in life they'll go on to other drugs. People who are using harder drugs, like quote unquote harder drugs, like cocaine or heroin, but 95 to 98% of those people will tell you they started with marijuana. That's what the research tells us. So we can't deny the link. Doesn't mean it's a causal if-then, like if you use marijuana once, then you'll use these harder drugs, but there's no denying the linkage here. And yet the industry will put out statements like this. And I think I saw a lot of these billboards in New Jersey over the years, from Weed Maps, where they have a great looking study from JAMA 2014 says states that legalize marijuana reduced their opioid-related deaths. Very encouraging. Sounds like, wow, there might be something here, and it's a very reputable study. But this study was replicated, and the same journal updated it with 5 more years of data. So from 2014 to 2019, they added 5 more years of data. They actually found a reverse trend. 23% increase in opioid-related deaths. So this is a great moment to tell you we really shouldn't cherry pick studies. And I'm not even telling you to cherry pick this study. What I am telling you is that last study wasn't the full picture. We now have updated information that tells us something different. And I think we need to give it at least 20 to 30 years to really get a full understanding of what the science is telling us on the association between marijuana and these opioid-related issues. So this is a great opportunity to tell you, don't just go hook, line, and sinker for the first study you see one way or the other. But I can tell you that, more research, 2018 in JAMA, opioid crisis appears to be getting worse. And, as a final little kind of dog ear to this, Colorado's opioid overdose deaths have gone up every single year since we legalized it. Now, that's not to say it caused the increases, but I can tell you, for certain, it didn't decrease our opioid issues. So very important that we get the facts and that we understand those. So what are the effects on public health? Well, your mind has endocannabinoid receptors all throughout. All throughout the brain, that they take in the THC, that active ingredient that gets you high. These receptors are also responsible for a number of very important activities, memory, reproduction, et cetera. And so what we're seeing is marijuana use is actually very strongly correlated to mental health issues. In fact, we're going beyond this association to where research is now starting to say it's causal. It's starting to say that extended use of marijuana can cause schizophrenia, psychosis, and other forms of mental illness. So you look at the research, particularly with youth. If you're starting before the age of 15, you're 4.5 times more likely to develop schizophrenia. And you look on the graph on the left here, and you see that the more use, the higher rates of schizophrenia. So we're seeing huge connections there in a lot of these major studies. But this is by far the most concerning study we've seen, probably in the last decade, on marijuana. From the probably one of the most prestigious scientific journals in the world, Lancet Journal of Psychiatry. What they found was regular users of today's high potency marijuana, not the old weak stuff, today's high potency marijuana, 5 times more likely to develop schizophrenia or psychosis, or other forms of mental illness. So huge, groundbreaking study that we're going to continue to see more research come out on. But that psychosis link, I was just talking to somebody here in Colorado today. There's, and I'll talk about this a little bit later, but there's a lot of work going on in Colorado to address the potency issue because it's becoming a widespread problem. And somebody said this quote, I'll quote for you, and I can't attribute who it was, but they said the industry knows it has a psychosis problem. That's a quote from this person, has a psychosis problem, and they are trying to hide it, much like tobacco tried to hide the cancers and other things. So this psychosis thing is very real. You're going to be seeing a lot more about it in the news. The research is really turning it up, and it is deeply concerning because of how high we're seeing the potency go. I'm told that it's safer than alcohol. Would it be great if they use marijuana instead of alcohol? Well, we debunked that myth a little while ago. But it's interesting. These drugs are apples and oranges, so I don't even want to get into the game of comparing them. However, this research study, which is a large research study done by Jonathan Calkins, a very widely respected researcher, look at it. I mean, tried to limit use but failed, more for marijuana, tried to cut down but failed, caused problems with emotions, caused problems with family or friends, caused serious problems at work. All these things higher for marijuana users than for alcohol users. Very interesting study that was done there. I know a number of folks probably on this Zoom call have done a lot of work to try to reduce drug use among youth. This research study that just came out in 2020 found that for all the states that legalized marijuana, they had, prior to legalizing it, they had downward trends in youth alcohol and marijuana use. Well, those downward trends were completely erased. Clock was completely turned back on those public health gains after legalizing marijuana. So very, concerning study that we saw there. And we're seeing now, this research data just came out literally a few weeks ago from the National Surveys on Drug Use and Health. That's the foremost federal survey on alcohol use. Nevada, California, Oregon, all 3 states with legal marijuana, recreationally and medically, seeing double-digit percentage increases in youth marijuana use. I mean, look at Nevada. I think it was over a 40% increase in Nevada, 25% increase in California. Huge increases in over the last 2 years among youth in these legal states. And you look at the data, just overall, we're doing a great job on cigarettes. We're doing a great job on alcohol. You see how that's kind of generally a downward trend there. But the one that is persistently starting to go up now is marijuana. And obviously it's because we have a more permissive environment where an industry is promoting this. And so what we can say for sure is that our youth are hearing the message loud and clear, seeing a 25% increase in legal states that have legalized marijuana, 25% increase in youth marijuana addiction. Again, that's that cannabis use disorder. It's a scientific code that your doctor will diagnose you with. So again, marijuana addiction is real and it is rising among our youth right now in states that legalize marijuana, and we've got to do something about it. But the only way you can start doing something about it is if we start acknowledging the facts and the science, which is that people can get addicted to this drug. And you compare the legal states to non-legal, not surprising, much bigger in legal states for youth marijuana use than non-legal states. Youth past month marijuana vaping continues to go up. Just saw some data today that was even fresher than this data is, just released today, that again found huge increases among all the youth categories for youth marijuana vaping. I'm gonna get more into the vaping in a little bit here because that's a major issue. Hospitalizations, it was really interesting. They told us in Colorado, okay, you had a huge increase in hospitalizations the year after legalization, but that's to be expected because nobody knows what's in these edibles, but over the years it's gonna go down. Well, we're now about 7 years into legalization here in our state, and we saw a triple-digit percentage increase again with marijuana-related hospitalizations here in Colorado. So it continues to go up. We continue to have the psychosis, continue to have the cannabis hyperemesis, which a lot of people are dying from, which is a new ailment that's coming from this high-potency weed where people are uncontrollably vomiting if they smoke a lot of weed. And they choke on that vomit and they die. So that is a huge new illness that's coming out. So we're seeing a lot more hospitalizations now in legal states like Colorado, Alaska, and et cetera. I'm not going to spend a lot of time here, but PTSD, a lot of times it's sold as marijuana sold as a salve to our vets. Unfortunately, a review of all the literature has found that that's completely false. It actually may make PTSD worse. So do your research on that. It's very important. Youth marijuana use, we're seeing that abuse of marijuana is linked to potentially suicide attempts, suicidality, self-harms. So we're seeing that link start to play out as well, in addition to the schizophrenia and other mental health issues. But I really wanted to hit on the vaping crisis. So hopefully we all remember that. Juul was hauled before Congress. We had a national vaping crisis where this debilitating lung illness called EVALI, was killing people, causing thousands of youth and people to have to go to the hospital. Their lungs were collapsing. They're getting lung transplants. So hopefully we all remember that. I don't know how many of you knew this, but the CDC reported that over 80% of the lung illnesses came from marijuana vapes. Over 80% of all of them came from marijuana vapes. And 1 in 6 of those illnesses and deaths came from the legal marijuana market. Something that was kind of lost, I think, in the shuffle in the news. In fact, 2 deaths in Oregon were traced directly to marijuana vaping and marijuana oils purchased from state licensed and supposedly regulated dispensaries. So there's this notion out there that we're going to regulate this drug. It's going to be perfectly safe. At least it won't be coming from the drug dealers. And yet, just a few years after we've seen legalization in some of these different states, we had our first national marijuana-based public health crisis, the vaping crisis. And I unfortunately expect we're going to see more. So it is very important that we get ahead of this vaping issue. And I thought that this was a really poignant quote. This guy traveled from Ohio to Colorado to get our regulated, quote unquote, weed. And this quote just really, it hit me. He thought that the weed was going to be safer. Those marijuana vapes are going to be safer because they never came off the street. He always got them from legal, regulated dispensaries here in Colorado. And now look at him. So unfortunately, the industry has sold another lie there, that the regulations are going to be very stringent and that they're going to abide by them. But why would we expect them to do that when we look at tobacco and alcohol and some of these other industries? Purdue Pharma, for example. You look at Oregon and California, they have loopholes in their laws that actually technically make pre-K and kindergartens not technically schools. So the pot shops are being set up right adjacent to these kindergartens. And so this is what happens when you have a big tobacco type industry with lots of money that's investing in the best lawyers, the best lobbyists, trying to dance around these rules. And so it's very important when you write new regulations here in your state to try to tamp this industry down a little bit, that you're very careful with what the language is and you really hold this industry accountable, because these are the kinds of things that happen. I mean, this was taken just a few months ago by a friend of mine in Colorado Springs. This is a pot shop. That's a mom with her toddler and her baby in a stroller with no masks. So there's a whole lot of problems with this picture. But this is what we've got going on in our state. And it's deeply concerning, especially when you think about the impact of that normalization on youth. So it's all about the industry right now. Child-friendly products. Again, all of these states, including your state, have law, have it written into that law. You can't have kid-friendly products. And yet they figure out a way to dance around those rules time and time again. And potency skyrocketing, aggressive marketing, which, New Jersey, you've got a great media market, huge media market. I fully expect they will capitalize on that. Contaminants, again, the vaping crisis, hundreds of thousands of recalls across multiple legal states. And the industry is doing what tobacco did, which is fight every regulation possible as hard as they can possibly fight it. And so don't forget the reason why. Altria is all the way in on this industry. They actually took a $14 billion stake in Juul. For those of you who don't know that, a week after they invested in marijuana. So, and then 6 months later, we had the vaping crisis. So, you can kind of just see where this is all heading, and it's not encouraging for those of us worried about health. This is a little bit of the history I mentioned. I'm not going to jump into this, but again, Juul started as a marijuana vaporizer company, and you can dig into that. And these were and are the marijuana vapes that they're selling. And by the way, PAX, which is the marijuana vaping company, is doing all the things Juul got in trouble for doing, marketing to youth, social media influencers, all that kind of targeting minority communities. They're doing all that stuff right now with these THC vaporizers, and they're getting away with it, which is just really wild to see. You see these kinds of ads that they're doing. So why do I mention some of these other industries? Well, obviously, they've all invested in marijuana, so it's irrelevant. But let's look at what the revenue model. So this is my business hat again. What is the revenue model for the alcohol industry? Okay, so the alcohol industry makes 75% of its profits from 10% of its users. Okay, so 10% of its customers make up basically the lion's share of the money that they make. So the average user in that cohort of 10% drinks 10 drinks of alcohol a day. Okay, so it's just a horrifying amount of alcohol consumption. Basically, the industry is making a huge load of money on the backs of alcoholics, which is I think we call that addiction for profit. So let's look, that's the model for alcohol. What's the model look like for, smoking responsibly, right? Because we see what drinking responsibly looks like. What does smoking responsibly look like? Well, 20% of the marijuana users make up about 70% of the marijuana consumption here in Colorado. So that is, again, heavy addictive use of marijuana. So again, addiction for profit. That's what we've got going on with this industry. And it's important that you know that, because we need to have healthcare people on these regulatory boards in New Jersey. I mean, I was reading the other day about how the NAACP was fighting to actually get a person of color to be on the regulatory board there in New Jersey, because they didn't even have somebody representing the perspective of these communities who have been disproportionately harmed. Even having a perspective on that board. But what about doctors too? And what about healthcare professionals? These are the people who need to be guiding these regulations, not industry executives and not people who are going to cash in on this, which is unfortunately what we're seeing places like your state and my state and a number of others. So what we learned in Colorado is that it's the Wild West. This is a picture I took myself shortly before COVID pandemic hit. Was walking into a backpack store in Denver with my family. We only had one daughter at the time, my daughter Shiloh, and she was about 3 at the time. Runs up, grabs a chocolate from this little edible or this little I just gave it away. This little sample thing here, and I grab one too because I love chocolate as well. We're about to eat it. Something looks a little funny, and I think, oh my goodness, these are marijuana edibles with 10 milligrams of THC in each square, which for those of you who don't know, 10 milligrams of THC is plenty to get you very, very, very high. And it was just sitting there free at the entrance. I could have eaten as much of this as I want at a backpack store. So this is the kind of thing that we see when we see mass normalization, mass commercialization. This company was very smart. They wanted to get their product out there, get people introduced to it. So they've got a financial incentive to try to do this sort of thing. And, who cares if it's kids, get caught in the way of issues like that. Got pot shops everywhere, which, those are coming, unfortunately, in New Jersey. You're going to see pot shops in a lot of places because they try to get their brands and everything ingrained in the public and in the communities. And what are these pot shops doing? They're, over 70% we found in Colorado were recommending marijuana to pregnant mothers. There's no such protection in your law in New Jersey from doing this. This might be something you want to work on. These pot shops, obviously they've got no medical professionals there. If they did, they would know that the American Academy of Pediatrics has said, do not use marijuana in pregnancy or breastfeeding. Can literally lead to the death or severe harm of an infant. Horrific decision. for these pot shops to be pushing pot on pregnant mothers, but that's what the research is showing us. So those are things you got to watch for in this industry. And so we did some things to try to bring light to this. You know, we put bibs on pot shop doors and at the governor's residence. Industry got off with zero, kind of punishment whatsoever. And so some recent reports had a report was released by the Colorado Health Department here in 2021, so just about a month or two ago, as well as one in 2019. I want to highlight some of the key findings that these reports found. About a 15% increase in youth under the age of 15 using marijuana over the past 2 years. Huge, very obviously big concern in Colorado. Vaping and dabbing are up huge. Now, if you don't know what dabbing is, that's how the youth are getting into these super high potency marijuana concentrates. Deeply, deeply concerning, very sickening. So if you want to know what dabbing is, you can YouTube it and you'll see a lot of kids that are dabbing and then blacking out. Really, really horrifying to watch. But if you want to see what it looks like, you can go see it online. But so obviously not a good direction we're seeing there. Huge increase in children being poisoned, very young children, babies. Again, the way this happens is you got like marijuana gummy bears, for example, sitting on the table. Kid gets into them, thinks that they're normal. We've seen issues where children have brought what they thought were benign gummy bears to class, not realizing they were marijuana-laced gummy bears. These are the kinds of issues we're experiencing, which again, never saw this issue before legalization, started seeing this issue after. Great example of that. Again, you see these tens of thousands of homes where they're either not storing the product safely, there's the smoke issue. In terms of storing it safely, well, a friend of mine has some kids that are older than mine. They go and play at their friend's house. The other day he told me, he said, Luke, he said, when I send my kids over there, I got to call the parents and I got to say, do you use marijuana? Do you have edibles in the house? Are they stored properly? Which to me is just crazy. I mean, as parents, parents were never asking these questions in Colorado prior to this. And so these are some of the unintended consequences of policy decisions like legalization. And regarding secondhand smoke, a quick note on that. American Lung Association says the carcinogens in secondhand marijuana smoke are the same as secondhand tobacco smoke. So think of those two things as being equally harmful. And actually there was a study that was reported on by Bloomberg 2 weeks ago that actually found that secondhand marijuana smoke may even be more harmful for you than secondhand tobacco smoke. You should look that up. It's a really big study. We're going to continue to see more research on that as well. I mentioned hospitalizations are going up. Exposure calls, poison control center calls doubled in Colorado after legalization. We have 1,000 pot shops compared to 600 McDonald's and Starbucks combined in Colorado. So huge commercialization, tons of stores, lots of advertising that we're seeing. So in summary, we're seeing a lot of commercialization, a lot of advertising, as I mentioned. Youth use is an issue. Thriving black market. I'm going to get into that in a little bit because there's a lot going on with the black market. But the promotion of special interests is a really big issue right now because we're actually experiencing this right now in Colorado because we have a huge push for a potency cap in Colorado. Because I think most of us can agree, whatever our persuasion is, that capping marijuana's potency probably is a smart idea. These unlimited potency products are just a little bit insane, but the industry does not want to limit potency, and it's obvious why. We looked at their revenue model, we looked where the market is. You literally have about probably half or more of the market now is these high potency concentrates, so they don't want to lose them. And so we're seeing that pushback again now. But the lobbying presence in Colorado for marijuana is the marijuana industry has the third largest lobbying presence in the state of Colorado. So huge number of lobbyists, well-paid lawyers that are just very trained at getting around regulations. And you see that, not only are they getting rid of limits on stores, we actually started out at 1,000-foot setback for pot shops to schools and parks. They've now reduced that to 500 feet. From 1,000 feet. Now, can you explain to me why an industry that has supposedly no interest in targeting our children wants to go from 1,000 feet to 500 feet from schools and parks, et cetera? I can't think of a really good explanation for that other than maybe they want to target our kids like tobacco did and like alcohol and these other brands that we've seen out there. So those are some of the issues we're seeing. And we know the message that it sends our youth. I think we're starting to see that in New Jersey now, but 1 in 4 12th graders, for example, found to want to either start using marijuana for the first time or increase their use of the drug if it were legalized federally. So, the decisions we make on the policy side do impact our youth. And so that's where, to Mike's point, we need strong parents right now, as well as strong policy to kind of work in tandem. And we're seeing that the number of kids 5 and younger nationally, huge increases in exposures to marijuana. Again, that's those gummy bears and other things. And poison control center calls, as I mentioned, Colorado, Massachusetts, Washington, huge increases in poison control center calls over the last, basically decade. So driving is a major problem we're seeing. Colorado saw a triple-digit percentage increase in marijuana impaired driving deaths. So that's somebody getting high, getting behind the wheel, and killing somebody in a car crash. 151% increase in that number. Washington State, that more than doubled. Oregon, 50% of every driver that they tested last year tested positive for marijuana. 50%, half of all the drivers they tested in Oregon tested positive for marijuana. So huge impairment on the roads concerns, very big. We saw a study just last year come out in JAMA that found that they're estimating about 7,000 or so more deaths on the road from marijuana impaired drivers federally, if we legalized federally across the country. So to put that in perspective for you, we have about 10,000 deaths on the road from drunk drivers. So we're basically almost doubling this problem. Which I think we need to think about. Some more research done on that I won't get into. Workplace. We are literally seeing an increase in every single state that is legalizing marijuana in workforce positivity. That's somebody getting high and going to work and testing positive at work. Every single state last year, Quest Diagnostics, they're the ones that do the testing for basically everybody. They know their stuff. This is what they're reporting. So big concerns in the workforce. I mean, imagine working in trucking. This is the safety sensitive workforce we're talking about, which had an even bigger increase. So imagine, your, rail, the guy, bus and truck driver, rail, people driving your rail cars, workers in nuclear power plants, et cetera, your airline pilot being high. These are the increases we're talking about. So got a lot of work to do there. And we're kind of going the wrong direction right now because the industry is very much hard at work. Their new frontier now is to make marijuana use a protected class. So say you can't test job applicants, which is exactly what Nevada did. They became the first state in the country to ban employers, all employers, no exceptions, from rejecting a job applicant because they tested positive for marijuana. So that's driving, that's pilots, et cetera, doctors. So that is a big concern that we're going to be watching, and something I think it's worth advocacy to try to get away from that, because we see that people who use marijuana in the workforce much more likely, much more prone to absenteeism, injuries, accidents, et cetera. In fact, they're actually hiring people from out of state, from the biggest construction employer in Colorado, hiring people from out of state because they can't pass a drug test. And construction, it's really very important. So I mentioned we're going to talk about black market. So we're told legalization, this is probably the number one promise. Legalization, we're going to get rid of the drug dealers, we're going to get rid of the cartels, there's going to be no black market, we're going to eliminate it. Well, according to Democratic California Governor Gavin Newsom, in California, the illegal market has gotten worse, not better. That's his direct quote he gave to the New York Times. Worse, not better since legalization. He's actually engaged the National Guard to fight cartels and stop the illegal pot grows in the state. That continues to this day. So huge problems in California. Look at the amount of illicit marijuana plants seized off of public lands here in Colorado. I mean, an astronomical increase since we saw legalization. So law enforcement is overwhelmed. We're shipping, my state is, marijuana to 32 plus different states. Note that the vast majority of these states have not legalized marijuana. So my state's policy decision is influencing these other states' policy decisions. And so a lot of people try to say, well, it's the state's issue, it's states' rights. I don't see how this is states' rights when my state is infringing on the rights of other states. And of course, this industry could care less. They want to open up new markets. That's what business is all about. Open up new markets in all the states that haven't legalized. And so they're, of course, going to go along with these kinds of activities. And so the cartels I mentioned, drug dealers and all that, have not gone away at all. In fact, they are buying houses in suburban neighborhoods here in around Denver, buying houses, gutting them, loading them up with hundreds of marijuana plants and turning them into grow houses, where they then sell that stuff on the street or ship it out and sell it in other states. So huge issue. And to just really put a cherry on top of this issue, Oregon, only 30% of all marijuana sales and consumption came from their legal market. So in other words, 70% of Oregon's market is black market marijuana. So it is an overwhelming problem in the state of Oregon. The Secretary of State issued a scathing report on this issue, saying less than 3% of all their pot shops have been inspected. And they said, Oregon's testing program cannot ensure that these products are safe or reliable. So God knows what they're putting in these stores. God knows what they're selling, if it's marijuana or if it's other things. No idea. And if you think this is just to Oregon, Oregon's just some extreme example. You got to read my boss's book, Dr. Kevin Svet. His book just was released a few days ago. I'm going to have a scan at the end here. You can check out the book. But there's whistleblower accounts from regulators in Colorado and other states where they're saying, same issue in their states. They're not inspecting any of these shops. I mean, and it's not surprising because you got literally one marijuana compliance official for every 83 marijuana businesses. And it's so interesting because you're promised, oh, we're not going to have to spend all this money on marijuana enforcement if we just legalize it because it'll just be legalized. What people don't realize is you actually have to spend more. You actually have to regulate this industry. You actually have to inspect this industry. You actually have to ensure the products are safe in this industry. There's a lot of money that has to go into this regulatory regime. And you can tell how overwhelmed they are in Oregon and also in other states. So DEA had a big report recently, huge, continued black market operations. I want to address social justice because social justice was a huge, I will say, marketing program to legalize marijuana in the state of New Jersey. We were very honored to work with the New Jersey Legislative Black Caucus. Their president and Senator Ron Rice was a great friend of ours. We did a lot of work with him and the Black Caucus on how this was not going to be social justice. And you probably read a number of his op-eds that he wrote on this issue. But in Colorado, for example, this is after legalization. We saw the rate of African Americans being arrested for marijuana-related offenses. That rate is double what it is for whites after legalization. So yes, you're still going to be arrested for marijuana-related offenses after legalization because there's all these regulations. Interestingly, with alcohol, alcohol is the #1 drug involved in arrests in this country. It's responsible for millions of arrests. So legalizing a drug does nothing to alleviate incarceration or arrest issues. But unfortunately, that's what it's being sold as doing. On-view arrests, much more likely for the Black community. And of course, on the ownership side, we're told that this is going to be the way to bring money into communities of color, that it's going to lift them out of poverty. What a joke. Less than 4% of the entire marijuana industry nationally is Black owned. And there's so much reporting on this fact. The industry is overwhelmingly white, wealthy investors from Wall Street, particularly, as well as the Silicon Valley, tobacco, et cetera. I mean, look at the board of Altria, all white guys. And you're telling me that these are the new social justice heroes that are going to lead us to reinvesting in Black communities? I don't think so. That's not what's playing out. In fact, what we are seeing is, in my opinion, social injustice. This industry, this is a great example. So bottom right-hand corner, map of Denver. Everything green is where white communities, what Caucasian communities live. Everything that's other colors are where minority communities live. You have the yellow and the purple there. So that's where they live in the city of Denver. Now, the top left map, every dot is a pot shop. And I'm going to let you connect the dots here. Those dots are going in the exact same spot that the minority communities live in. So they are executing the exact same predatory model that tobacco does, that liquor does. We all know where those liquor stores are. We all know where the tobacco shops are. We all know where the payday loan stores are. They're always targeting those communities. And the marijuana industry, invested in by all of those industries, is doing the exact same thing. As a predatory addiction for profit model, we need to treat them that way. And there's a lot of I think a lot of dissonance right now. Legislators and other people think, oh, well, there's support for legalization, so we have to rubber stamp everything this industry does. This industry, legal or not, needs to be treated as a predatory industry that needs to be strictly regulated, which, by the way, is what New Jersey was promised, that it would be strictly regulated, that communities would be protected, that youth would be protected. Hold them to that promise and don't allow things like this to happen. We haven't seen our prison populations reduced in any single state that has legalized marijuana. The prison populations have continued to rise. And as far as tax revenue goes, there's a lot of, hay made about all the money you're going to make in your state. Well, if it's anything like all the other legal states, it's probably not going to be much. Former Colorado governor, now U.S. Senator, Democrat, Senator John Hickenlooper, he will tell you he's in support of legalization, but he says, don't legalize marijuana for the revenue. It is a drop in the bucket. That's a direct quote from him. And I just bumped into him at the airport actually about a year and a half ago and told him I was sharing that quote with people. And he said, keep telling them. He said, because it's absolutely legalization. It is a drop in the bucket compared to the regulatory, law enforcement, and social costs that you're going to face, which, by the way, not surprising at all, given that we lose $10 to $15 for every $1 in tobacco tax revenue and alcohol tax revenue, we're losing money hand over fist on our legal drugs. So this is following in a very similar model. I mean, look at it, 0.9% of Colorado state budget is marijuana tax revenue. Or, what we're making. And the other thing is we need to address the fact that the costs need to be spelled out. And right now, nobody's spelling out the costs. We did an estimate, what those costs might break out to be, but we need a cost study on what that cost is of legalization to put against the revenues. Because I'll tell you, if I went to my board at the business I sold and said, hey guys, we're making $10 million in revenue this year, they would laugh me out of the room because they'd say, what was your cost of doing business? If you made 10 million, but you spent 20 million to get that 10, you lost $10 million. So it's a horrible business that you're running right now. Same kind of test should be applied to this policy of legalization, and we should know what those costs are to your state government. So a lot of people think, well, it's a done deal federally. There's all this support for legalization. New Jersey overwhelmingly passed your legalization ballot measure. Let's be real. It really, from my perspective, was a little depressing to see. So you could say, well, the ship has sailed, right? They said yes, so clearly everybody wants legalization. Not so. How you ask the question is key. And I really wish that when you guys voted on your ballot, you could have had policy options, because how you ask the question makes all the difference. I'll give you the case study here. There was a poll done by Emerson College in New York a few years ago. Found 60% of New Yorkers said yes, we support legalization. It was a yes/no question. Do you support it, yes or no? 60% yes. Well, we went to Emerson College and we said, you know what? Ask that same question again to the same survey respondents, but give them 4 options. Decrim, remember the buckets I talked about: decrim, medical, recreational, or prohibition. So, those 4 options. And when you broke it out into those options, support fell from 60% for recreational to 40%. So 20-point swing. That's a huge swing among the same exact respondents. So overwhelmingly, people want decriminalization. They want people to, don't go to jail if you got a joint in your pocket, but don't have commercialization. Or they want medical marijuana, but they don't want this idea of stores. So I strongly believe if you had done the ballot question like this in New Jersey and in my state of Colorado, I know for a fact in Colorado we would have done decrim, because everybody I talked to that voted for it says, I had no idea it was going to be industry. I had no idea it was going to be potency. I had no idea it was going to be these edibles, these candies, etc. So people, when you give them options, they want something different. It's important that we realize that, because we're missing a huge policy nuance in this country, and it's proven out by the data. Look at this breakdown. These are the numbers of cities and towns that have opted out of legalization in their state. California, Colorado, Michigan, Oregon. Look at the numbers in California and Michigan. California and Michigan both passed legalization overwhelmingly. I mean, I think it was around like 60%, maybe over 60% of voters voted in favor of legalization in those 2 states. And yet 80% of the cities and towns in these states have opted out. They've banned pot shops. Why is that? Does that seem crazy to you? Well, not if you've seen the stuff we've talked about, that slide in the buckets, not if you've seen the poll I just showed you, where you understand, okay, people, what they're just giving yes or no, they're going to say yes. But if you ask them what they really want, they want decrim. They don't want shops in their towns. And it's overwhelmingly proved again and again and again, with the vast majority of legal states opting out of these sales and stores. So very important to get that nuance. We did it nationally, no surprise. Almost 70% of Americans wanted the other options, not recreational legalization. So I mentioned we're going to talk about some policy solutions. Okay, so you're in a state that obviously has chosen to legalize recreational medical marijuana. So there are a number of things that you can focus on doing to try to improve the environment that you're in. It's not going to be perfect. You're going to have to deal with this massive industry. It's a deal with the devil that your state's made. But there are some things you can do to dramatically protect public health. First of all, as you can mention, get rid of the edible, as I've talked about, get rid of the edibles, the high THC concentrates. Right now, your bill allows for unlimited THC potency, unlimited types of edibles and all that stuff. I mean, they claim to have restrictions for youth-friendly products, but you've seen what happens in states with those restrictions. It's pretty much ignored. So these are things that you really need to hone in on. A potency cap. There's a massive movement across the country right now to cap the potency of marijuana. And Montana, I think, is going to be the first one to cap potency at 15%. That's versus the 99% that we're seeing. It would be unprecedented. It would be massive for public health. And Colorado, we're working on a 15 to 30% cap right now that we have a lot of momentum for. So your state can jump in on the action and get in that momentum. And we actually have a document we just prepared on how to do that with some policy language and other things I'm happy to share if people want that info. The second thing is get the industry out of the regulatory process. There's no reason why the fox should be guarding the hen house. Hopefully we can all get that, but I'll give you an example of why that's not common sense. Here in Colorado, our marijuana czar, the guy who's responsible for all marijuana regulations in the state, had to sell his pot company to take that position in government. So literally like the Marlboro man being the head of the FDA. I mean, it's despicable. So work to get public health advocates, doctors, people in recovery, et cetera, into these regulatory positions. Thirdly, as many restrictions as you can put on advertising, the better, because they're going to advertise like crazy. We really need state government to get out of this mode of promoting drug use. They need to have a public awareness campaign onto the science of today's marijuana, on the issues with potency, why youth shouldn't use, why people need to avoid this drug. It is a harmful drug. Don't get them in, don't let them get in this place of just blatantly promoting this drug, which is actually what we're seeing in Colorado. There was a huge op-ed in the Denver Post today where somebody was just castigating Colorado's government for openly encouraging marijuana use. We're actually literally putting out a charity drive for the state government where they're putting out special edition license plates with like get high, 420, bong on these license plates, and it's state government sanctioned. It's disgusting. But so don't let your state government get that way. Let's get them putting out public health science-based messages. And then obviously drug driving campaigns, huge priority as well. In states that haven't legalized, not as relevant to you, but we advocate for decriminalization. We pass decriminalization laws, smart reforms. We don't want to see kids getting records. We don't want to see people getting records for low-level use. We want to see them get help, treatment, addiction services, et cetera. We push for these kinds of campaigns in states that haven't legalized. Everything I've talked about today and a whole lot more, about 60 pages more, is in this report that we put out. It's free to the public. Learn about sam.org. You can check it out. I'm strongly encourage you download this report. You can use it in Trenton and everywhere else that you need it. And I'm going to wrap up with this. I've been working at SAM for just about 4 years now, and my reason for being here, for working at SAM, doing what I do, is I'm a dad. I've got a kid, 2 daughters, 2 wonderful, lovely daughters, and a lovely wife. And I'll just take you back to 3 months before I joined SAM. My daughter was about 10 months old. She's sleeping in her stroller. My wife and I are going out for a lovely walk in the evening in a lovely community we're living in called Stapleton, which was Northeast Denver. Walking down, the neighborhood has a lot of young families, a lot of young kids like ours. Walking down the street, she's sleeping in her stroller, and somebody lights up a joint, and that secondhand smoke just buries her stroller. And as we're walking, my wife and I are both quietly acknowledging the fact that our daughter is breathing in, as she's sleeping, she's breathing in the secondhand marijuana smoke. It's getting into her lungs. There's nothing we as her parents can do about that. She's a victim to this person's decision. And we're just kind of quietly walking. And my wife turns to me and she says, "You know what? That seems to happen just about every single time we take her for a walk. And this is not normal. This should never be normal." And I turned to her and I said, "You're absolutely right. This does seem to happen all the time, and something needs to be done about it." So it was from that point, literally 3 months later, I joined SAM because I wanted to make sure that these stories of the unintended consequences, of the harms of these policies got out, and that there was a voice for them, because not enough people are hearing that message. Everybody's hearing, "Oh, marijuana is not addictive. Oh, marijuana is the cure for cancer. Oh, it's no big deal. And oh, youth don't use it. And who cares? And oh, it's regulated and it's perfect." We hear all those messages because there's millions of dollars in ad campaign revenue behind them. But we don't hear the stories of the parents and the people who are impacted, the victims, the children who can't speak for themselves, that get the secondhand marijuana smoke in their home, the 32,000 homes in Colorado where children are exposed to secondhand marijuana smoke. These are the people that don't have voices, and that's what my organization is about, giving a voice to. So that is why I do it. I mentioned my boss's book. Let me just wrap up with this. I'm sorry. This is the last slide. So you can scan this with your phone right now. This book just came out a couple days ago. And basically, This book, in my opinion, for those of you who have read The Jungle by Upton Sinclair, early 1900s, that book blew the doors off the food industry, basically revealed things that were happening in the food packing industry that no one in America knew about. This book came out, people read it, they were so horribly disgusted that it created the FDA and all the food regulations that we have now to ensure food and product safety. Okay, that book was groundbreaking. This book is the jungle to the marijuana industry. It is loaded with whistleblower accounts of people who used to work in the industry, marijuana regulators who are whistleblowing on state governments, drug dealers who are capitalizing on legalization right now to make a huge profit, more money than they've ever made. I strongly encourage you to get this book. It will open your eyes. It is a very amazing read. I've read it about 10 times, so I can comment on that with full authority. But I strongly encourage you to check out this book. It is going to be well worth your time. And with that, I will wrap it up. Learnaboutsam.org, that's our website. Luke at learnaboutsam.org. Feel free to email me anytime, questions, concerns. If you need help in the things that you're doing, I'm happy to assist. So I want to thank everyone for your time this evening, and I'm happy to take some questions.
Okay, thank you so much, Luke. That was so much information jam-packed into that hour. So I really appreciate you trying to give us as much as you can. We had a lot of questions come through the chat.
Great.
So I'm going to do my best to get them all to you in a timely fashion. I apologize to anyone if we don't get to your question today. But if you'd like an answer, you can certainly reach out to me and I can see if I can't get the right information in your hands.
Great.
So Luke, how do they test for people using marijuana in an employment situation? You could smoke on a Friday night and be okay on a Monday?
So yeah, there's kind of two elements to that question. So the first thing is the test. Right now, the most effective way to test is with the toxicology screen, a blood test, which is very expensive, takes a long time to come back, and it doesn't really give you an accurate representation of how high or impaired the person was. Right now, we're in a state in this country where states have chosen to legalize it, your state included, my state included, where there's no roadside test for impairment. There's no scientifically validated per se limit, so we have no idea what the science says about someone's level of impairment on the road. All we can really know is that there's THC in their system. So we're in a very, very troubling scenario, but this is the scenario we find ourselves in. Regarding the second piece of that question of somebody could smoke, get high on Friday, and be fine on Monday. Not necessarily, maybe some people, but interestingly enough, we're seeing a lot of research that says when you use marijuana, it can actually have lingering effects up to 30 days or maybe even more beyond that. If you're a regular heavy user of marijuana, it could be even longer, even without you using it. So we're actually still determining what that looks like. And that's just one of the many myriad complexities. And you may say, well, Luke, there's so many pieces to even just that part of it. Like, how can we even know the answer on that? And frankly, that's the argument, the discussion we were trying to have with the legislature and also with the public about why maybe we shouldn't rush into a decision like this to legalize until we better understand these questions. But again, we're kind of going to have to do trial by fire. But these are just some of the many issues that we have right now.
Okay. How can we as parents stop businesses from coming into our community?
Great question. You got to opt out. You got to opt out of pot shops in your town, your city. That is the best way to do it. A lot of towns and cities have been doing it in your state. I encourage you to join them. We've done a number of things to provide resources. If you actually go to learnaboutsam.org, we have our local control resource center off the menu. That's got a full guide with sample ordinances and opt-out language you can rip and use in your town. That is a great way to do it. You can join the 80% of people in Michigan who have opted out, the 80% of Californians who have opted out, which, by the way, the 80% of California, that includes LA County, which is just, again, most people don't know this stuff. Overwhelming people in these states that have voted to legalize have opted out. So again, don't take hook, line, and sinker this notion that, oh, well, everybody voted for it, so everybody wants it. That is absolutely not the case. People, again, maybe didn't want folks to go to jail, maybe thought people should get their medicine, but didn't necessarily want to have these shops pushing products in their neighborhood.
Okay, great. Is there any correlation between marijuana use and episodic suicidal thoughts? I'm seeing both in many people.
Yes, so there is, the research is still forthcoming as to how causal that link is, but we've seen a number of research studies over the last 5 years indicate the suicide issue, particularly among youth. We're seeing that. So that research body is going to continue to grow. I did mention a couple of studies in my slides that if we send those out, you can check those out. They get into that issue. But there's been a huge increase in teen suicides in Colorado over the last 3 years. And the THC showing up in those toxicology reports has risen every year. So there's a lot of people raising the alarm about that. One piece of the bill that they're trying to pass here in Colorado, in addition to the potency cap, is to mandate for all suicides that they immediately take a tox screen for marijuana. So we can try to get a better understanding of that link there. So we're going to continue to see that borne out.
Okay, great. Someone else put in, what are our rights with respect to secondhand marijuana smoke, especially with the pandemic, which impacts those of us with lung issues?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, and this is where we really, it's been pretty much crickets from the anti-tobacco groups, the non-smokers' rights groups, which done a great job with tobacco, and they're just kind of persona non grata for marijuana. I'm hoping that they'll wake up and smell the smoke, if you mind me saying that. But this is where we really need those advocates to step up, and we're going to continue to step up, and we all need to do that. We're not really, there's nothing in the legislation that we're seeing, not in your state, not anywhere, that is actively talking about the issue of the smoke issue. Some states like New York have literally blatantly allowed public use of marijuana. So in New York, you can literally smoke a joint pretty much anywhere in public, which is mystifying to say the least. New Jersey, I'm not sure if you allow public use explicitly in the bill or not. But again, it's really an issue of enforcement, right? You can't have a cop on every corner, at every playground, at every park to stop people from smoking in public. And so because of this expanded promotion use, you're going to see more of these issues.
Okay, great. Can you comment on an increase in, whether there's an increase in violent or non-violent crime in states that have legalized?
That's a great question. There's been some interesting writing done on that subject. I would say we are not at a place where we can say definitively that you have marijuana legalized environment, you're going to see more violence crime. I will say Colorado is seeing an unprecedented level of violent crime. It's up double-digit percentage points in my state. I don't know what it looks like in some of the other states. I think it's definitely, the jury's still out on that one, but there's a lot of growing concern, and a lot of people will say, yes, there is a link. We're not prepared to say, that there's a definitive link at this time.
Okay, great. What would make a police officer suspect someone driving under the influence of marijuana?
Great question. So right now, the best way to do that is they have trained law enforcement officers called DREs, drug recognition experts, who are certified and basically looking for all the cues of an impaired driver. So it's obviously not as accurate as a blood test or something like that, but it's considered, supposedly it's admissible in court, but unfortunately juries who are filled with people who are sold this myth that marijuana doesn't impair driving, because as crazy as that sounds, the industry is literally saying it doesn't impair driving. If you don't believe me, look up all the TV interviews that we've done where we've debated these advocates, where they openly deny that we're seeing an increase in marijuana impairment on the roads, which is crazy. However, that impairment, I just lost my train of thought there. What was I talking about? Sorry, Susan.
You were how a police officer would suspect someone
yes.
of driving.
Yes. So DRE is basically looking for signs of impairment is really the best way to do it. And then they have to do the blood test, the toxicology test, which, as I mentioned, it's expensive and it's very time intensive. You don't get the results for a number of days afterwards. So that's really the best way to do it right now.
Okay, and a follow-up to that question, are there any drugged driving tests similar to like a breathalyzer, either currently or on the horizon?
Not currently, hopefully on the horizon, but it depends on how far out the horizon you think that we're probably looking at a couple decades to really have something that's scientifically validated and approved. Again, we have breathalyzers for alcohol. We do not have breathalyzers for THC. And there are a number of companies, by the way, who are saying, oh, we've got a THC breath test that's really good. And so there's some promising technologies out there, a number of companies who are trying to address this issue, because obviously it's a major problem. But for the scientific community to really vet it out, validate it, and for us to have an approved standard, we are a long ways out from that. So time will tell.
Okay. Let me just see. THC vapes are ruining lungs and increasing hospitalizations, wouldn't that apply to all vapes, whether tobacco, THC, or
Yep.
CBD?
Yeah, absolutely. So vaping in general is not safe. I mean, cigarettes aren't safe. Vaping isn't safe. And you can, I don't really care about the debate about which one may be more or less harmful. They're both harmful, and we shouldn't put anything in our lungs. But that's another debate. But yeah, so absolutely, it's an issue no matter what. Interestingly, we see states, I think New Jersey, banned flavored vapes for nicotine, but there wasn't a ban for flavored vapes for marijuana. So it's, again, one of those hilarious double standards that we're seeing. So, and that's an issue I think in New York as well. So that is, that is the issues that, they see these things as separated. It's a great point. The vaping is a concern no matter what is in that vape. But my point with just some of the CDC data was to point out that vaping crisis we saw, yes, it was nicotine vaping and marijuana vaping. But a lot of people didn't realize how central marijuana and the legal marijuana market were to that crisis. And so I wanted to make sure I pointed that out because that was just borne out in the data.
Okay, great. Some of these are repeats. Can you speak to the Cannabis Coalition and their objectives? They say they're going to develop federal policy.
Yes. So the Cannabis Coalition, there's so many different coalitions. Are you talking about a federal? It sounds like a federal coalition. So many different coalitions that we've seen form in the last couple of months. So I can't remember which one the Cannabis Coalition is, but there are multiple coalitions. Altria, Philip Morris formed a huge coalition for cannabis regulations as well just last month. So there are a number of groups trying to kind of formulate federal regulations. And we're going to see what those end up looking like. But so far, not a lot of social justice expertise on these coalitions. I will just say that.
Okay, thanks. And are companies that hold to national standards like OSHA exempt from the Nevada ban or other testing?
No exemptions for the Nevada ban. All companies, no matter what position it is, no matter what company it is, they cannot reject a job applicant for testing positive for being high with marijuana. And by the way, so they're pushing that across the different states for marijuana, but they're actually trying to get rid of all drug testing, period. And that sounds extreme and crazy, but I encourage you to go to our friends who were very active in New Jersey and who are pushing for a number of bills across the country called Drug Policy Alliance. They're pushing for legalization. And on their roadmap, their strategic vision, they say verbatim, they want to ban all drug testing, not just for marijuana, ban all drug testing. So that is the direction that this advocacy is going.
Okay, great. What factors impact why one child develops an addiction to marijuana while another doesn't?
That is a great question. I mean, I don't think we have the final answer on any of that. I mean, there's so many different, potential factors that could go into that, whether it's the way somebody's raised, whether it's social norms, their community, whether it's, economic. There are a lot of different factors that go into that. So I would say that I have a great answer to that question other than, some people get addicted and some people don't. Some people use heroin, for example, and don't get addicted at all. They could use it 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 times and don't get addicted. And yet you have a whole legion of other people that use it and get very addicted and die of overdoses. So it's very funny. A lot of people just assume like the heroins and cocaines and other drugs that, you just use it once and you get addicted and everybody gets addicted. That's not the case. Actually, I think most people do not get addicted to those drugs. So again, this idea that, well, it's only addictive if everybody gets addictive and it's only these other drugs that are addictive and not marijuana, a little bit definitely not based in science.
Okay, great. Are there statistics available from the addiction and recovery industry about the cost related to legalization?
So not really, to be honest with you. And I think that's a great place to maybe develop some of those statistics. The only real cost report that's been done is done by an institute in Colorado called the Centennial Institute. And they basically found, they did a 92-page report. They estimate that for every $1 in marijuana tax revenue, the state of Colorado pays about $4.50 in costs. So that's the only cost study that's been done. And so we're hoping that more will be done.
Any insights on treatment programs for substance use disorders where patients are on medical marijuana?
Not so. first of all, we're strong proponents of treatment, drug courts. We want to, when we talk about smart decrim, that's kind of what we try to write into the bills is decriminalization, but it's not like somebody's paying a fine and just going on with their life and their addiction. They're getting kind of routed into that treatment program or into a drug court or whatever it may be, after a certain number of violations. That's kind of what we see as our model. Regarding, medical marijuana as a part of that treatment program, the research just has not borne out that there's really any medical use for whole plant marijuana. I mentioned that the FDA has approved some of the different components of the marijuana plant, and I think that's likely the way we'll see medications be approved, for treatment or anything else. But in terms of smoking marijuana or marijuana edibles, those kinds of things, we're not seeing those being effectively used in that setting.
Okay, and just lastly, Luke, before we wrap this up, I think you had already answered this, but maybe you can just reiterate. They were asking if you would share the PowerPoint, or is it the information available online for participants?
Both, yeah. So I will certainly be happy, feel free to send out my PowerPoint, I'll send it out. Happy to do that. And then everything that I have is freely available in like one-pagers or in our big report or different pages of our website. So I strongly encourage you to check out learnaboutsam.org. We have the toolkit section, which has tons of one-pagers on every topic: youth use, black market, quick facts, etc., talking points, and all that stuff. We have PowerPoints that you can pull from there. Our report is on there. So strongly encourage you to check out our website. We have literally 2 different pages on social justice. One little note on social justice: we've been working on that issue long before George Floyd. We're not kind of on the latest fashion train of, oh, now we care about social justice. We had launched a decriminalize, don't legalize campaign with the NAACP in Illinois, in partnership with them, which we're very proud of our partnership with the NAACP in a number of different states, called Decriminalize, Don't Legalize. We launched that actually in January of last year. And that Decriminalize, Don't Legalize page is on our website as well. And you can check out some of the different initiatives we're doing there.
Okay, thank you so much for taking the time to answer all those questions. I'm sorry if I missed some. They were kind of coming through the chat quickly.
No, that's great. Great questions. Thank you all.